Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining today. I want to begin with a direct premise. The central challenge in cybersecurity today is not a shortage of tools, not a shortage of effort, and not even a shortage of spending. The challenge is that most organizations are still trying to secure a modern enterprise using an operating model built for a prior era. The enterprise has changed materially. It's now cloud-enabled, API-connected, identity-driven, partner-integrated, and increasingly influenced by AI-enabled workflows and automation. Yet many organizations still center cybersecurity around a model whose primary strength is detecting and responding after compromise. That is necessary, but it's not sufficient. And the data makes this plain. IBM's 2024 Cost of a Data Breach report put the global average cost of a breach at $4.88 million, up from $4.45 million just the year before. IBM also reported the average time to identify and contain a breach at 258 days. Now, this is not a small optimization problem. This is a strategic design problem. At the same time, Verizon's 2024 DBIR found that 68% of breaches involved a non-malicious human element, and vulnerability exploitation as an initial access step to increase sharply. That means the attack surface is not just expanding technically, it's expanding organizationally, operationally, and behaviorally. So the thesis for today is straightforward. Cybersecurity can no longer be treated primarily as a downstream operation function. It must be designed as an enterprise value architecture, something embedded into how value is created, delivered, governed, measured, and protected. That's the arc of this talk. First, I'll show why the Security Operations Center, the SOC-centric model, is no longer enough. Then I'll show why tooling alone does not solve the problem. From there, we'll frame the real issue: enterprise misalignment. Then we'll walk through a maturity progression from reactive security to adaptive security. And finally, we'll show what it means to treat cybersecurity as an enterprise value architecture rather than a defensive afterthought. With that frame established, let me briefly ground this perspective in who I am and why I'm bringing this lens to the conversation. Before I go deeper into the model itself, let me establish the perspective I'm bringing. My work has consistently sat at the intersection of enterprise delivery, cybersecurity leadership, and AI-enabled operating models. That combination matters because the problem we are discussing today does not live neatly inside one silo. It's not just a security problem, not just a technology problem, and not just a governance problem. It is an enterprise design problem. Across my career, I've worked in and around large-scale operating environments where security, delivery, governance, and execution decision-making have to come together coherently. I've seen what happens when security is treated as a separate function that audits the business from the outside. I've also seen what happens when security is embedded into architecture, governance, and execution from the start. The difference is speed, clarity, resilience, and executive trust is substantial. Through Shost Advisory Group, the focus is on helping organizations move beyond fragmented reactive models towards structured, measurable, enterprise-aligned operating models. That includes enterprise security strategy, portfolio and delivery alignment, governance, design, and architecture level reframing, and the practical operationalization of AI and modern delivery capabilities in a way that's governed, scalable, and accountable. That perspective is particularly important now because cyber risk has become inseparable from enterprise performance. The World Economic Forum's 2025 Global Cybersecurity Outlook underscores that cyber complexity is being intensified by geopolitical tension, emerging technologies, supply chain interdependencies, and the growing sophistication of cybercrime. It also notes that large organizations identify supply chain complexity as a major barrier to cyber resilience. This is not a narrow technical issue. This is an executive leadership issue. So what I want to do in this session is not simply describe a threat landscape. I want to provide a practical executing, reframing, one that treats cybersecurity as a value-bearing enterprise architecture, not because that sounds more strategic, but because the numbers, the operating realities, and the risk landscape now demand it. With that context in place, let's move directly into the first major point. Cybersecurity is not a function. This slide is intentionally direct because the market still gets this wrong. Cybersecurity is not a function in the narrow organizational chart sense. It cannot be reduced to a team, a budget line, a control tower, or a collection of operational activities. If we define it that way, then we automatically position it downstream from value creation. We make it a reviewer, an approver, a responder, or at best, a support capability. And that's precisely the limitation that we need to break. A function can be isolated. A function can be routed around. A function can be engaged late. And a function can be measured in activity rather than strategic effect. Architecture is different. Architecture determines how systems behave, how constraints are imposed, and how resilience is designed in, and how value survives stress. That distinction matters because the modern enterprise is not defended at one point. It spans identities, endpoints, APIs, cloud configurations, third-party relationships, data flows, privileged access, and increasingly autonomous workflows. Microsoft's 2024 Digital Defense Report said Microsoft is seeing more than 600 million identity attacks every day. That single figure should permanently end any notion that cybersecurity can be adequately framed and contained as an operational specialty. Identity is now a structural enterprise issue, not a niche technical one. The Verizon 2024 DBIR, which we mentioned on the previous slide, reinforces this point from another angle, right? So if 68% of breaches involve a non-malicious human element, then security cannot be isolated to a SOC or a tool stack. It is embedded in how people work, how access is granted, how processes are designed, and how technology is governed. So when I say cybersecurity is not a function, what I mean is this. It is a cross-enterprise architectural capability that governs how value is protected across the entire operating model. It should influence how products are designed, how change is introduced, how risk is accepted, how exceptions are handled, how third parties are governed, and how the board understands resilience. This is the foundational shift for the rest of this presentation. And once we accept that, the question becomes obvious. If cybersecurity is not a function, then exactly what has gone wrong with the way many organizations still operate today? The answer is the enterprise changed, and in some aspects, security has not. Let's make this slide real because it's one of the most important inflection points in the prezo. What you're looking at here is not a criticism of the SOC as a capability. It is a criticism of what happens when the SOC becomes the center of gravity for the entire security model. The image is deliberately circular. Alerts, triage, response, repeat, and in the middle, no progression. And that's the crux of the issue. The SOC is extraordinarily active. It detects, it investigates, it responds, it escalates, it closes tickets, it generates dashboards, it shows motion everywhere. But in many organizations, that motion does not translate into structural improvement. It translates into recurrence. The same classes of issues reappear. The same categories of alerts return. The same weaknesses in identity, configuration, access logging, vendor exposure, segmentation, and process discipline continue to regenerate new operational work. And this is why the subtitle matters. Activity without progress. The data strongly supports this point. According to Gartner, by 2025, 50% of SOC teams will fail to effectively triage alerts due to alert volume and skill shortages. Now, layer on attacker speed, right? CrowdStrike's 2025 Global Threat Report found that the average e-crime breakout time dropped to only 48 minutes, with the fastest recorded breakout at 51 seconds. So defenders are often trapped in a loop, while adversaries are optimizing for compression, speed, and lateral movement. If the enterprise is relying too heavily on downstream operational response, the attacker only has to be right once and right fast. And the volume problem is not theoretical either. As we noted on the previous slide, Microsoft reported seeing 600 million identity attacks per day across its telemetry. Now, that scale means organizations cannot respond their way to maturity. They cannot ticket volume their way to resilience. They cannot triage their way into architectural coherence. At some point, the organization has to stop treating recurring signals as isolated operational events and start treating them as evidence of design failure. That is what the loop is showing. Alerts are not progress. Triage is not progress. Response is not progress, and repetition is certainly not progress. Progress is when the enterprise learns from recurring operational signals and changes the system itself. Progress is when repeated alert patterns drive change in architecture, identity controls, network design, cloud configurations, privileged access models, software delivery controls, vendor governance, and executive decision-making. And progress is when the enterprise reduces the need for the same classes of operational response because the underlying conditions that created those responses have been changed upstream. A practical example of this helps here. Imagine an organization repeatedly handling phishing-driven credential compromise. The SOC can detect suspicious sign-ins, triage them, disable accounts, reset credentials, and close incidents. That is all operationally necessary. But if the same pattern keeps returning because MFA gaps remain, help desk verification is weak, conditional access is inconsistent, privileged identities are overexposed, and user-targeted controls are underdeveloped, then the SOC is not advancing the enterprise. It's absorbing the consequences of architectural weakness. That is the difference between operational excellence and enterprise progression. The SOC can be highly competent and still be trapped in a model that recycles the same exposure classes. And that's why this slide matters so much in the narrative arc of this presentation. It forces a very uncomfortable but necessary realization. If cybersecurity is centered primarily around the loop of alerts, triage, response, and repeat, then the organization may be operating an efficient reaction machine without building a more secure enterprise. So the question this slide creates is the right one. If the SOC loop does not by itself create progression, then what does? What creates actual movement in maturity, resilience, and enterprise value protection? This is where we go next, away from the cyclical activity toward a fundamentally different framing of cybersecurity. Now, this slide explains why everything we just discussed becomes unsustainable. Because what we are dealing with is not just complexity, it's acceleration as well. And more specifically, it's asymmetrical acceleration. On the top curve, you see threats, and more importantly, you see how fast they are evolving. On the bottom, you see traditional defense, and you can immediately see the problem. It is not that defenses are standing still, it's because they are not scaling at the same rate, and that gap, that space between the two curves, is where risk is expanding. Now, let's anchor this in reality. According to Checkpoint Research, cyber attackers increased globally by 38% year over year in 2023, with some sectors experiencing increases well over 50%. At the same time, IBM X-Force has reported that attackers are increasingly shifting towards automated attack chains, AI-assisted phishing, and identity exploitation, which significantly compromises the time required to execute attacks. What that means is attackers are no longer scaling linearly, they are scaling programmatically. Now, contrast that with how most organizations defend. Security teams are still adding tools, expanding dashboards, increasing alert coverage, hiring analysts and building workflows, all of which are necessary, but fundamentally linear responses to an exponential problems. That mismatch is exactly what this slide calls the acceleration gap, and it shows up in very specific ways. First, time compression. Attackers are reducing the time between initial access and meaningful impact. Defenders are still correlating signals across systems, teams, and tools. Second, surface expansion. Every cloud deployment, every API, every identity, every SaaS integration expands the attack surface, but defense is still often organized around control points, not system design. Third is automation asymmetry. Attackers are automating exploitation. We know this. Defenders are still heavily dependent on human-driven triage and response. And that leads to a very important conclusion. You cannot close an exponential gap with incremental improvement. You cannot hire your way out of it. You cannot tool your way out of it. You cannot process your way out of it. Because the problem is not effort. The problem is model mismatch. And this is exactly why organizations start to feel what we described in the previous slide. More alerts, more work, more pressure, but not more control, because the system they are operating was never designed to handle this rate of change. And that brings us directly to the next slide and the most important realization in the presentation. If threats are scaling faster than defenses, then the issue is not that we need more tools. The issue is that we're operating inside the wrong model, which is why, as we're about to see, this is not a tooling problem, it is an operating model failure. What this slide is saying is simple, but it is one of the more important distinctions we're discussing. This is not a tooling problem, it's an operating model failure. On the left of the slide, you see what many organizations have built, right? It's a pile of tools, alerts, dashboards, and warning signals. It's bright, noisy, urgent, busy, and that's exactly the point. The environment feels active, it feels instrumented, it feels like something's happening all the time. But activity is not the same thing as control, and instrumentation is not the same thing as architecture. And that's why the left side is labeled with three very specific words: alerts, noise, and fragmentation, because that is what happens when organizations respond to cyber complexity primarily by buying more technology without redesigning the system around it. They accumulate capability, but they do not create coherence. They generate telemetry, but they do not necessarily improve decision quality. They increase coverage, but they often fail to improve integration, ownership, or governance. And the data reflects exactly what this slide is showing. According to Gartner, the average enterprise now operates more than 45 security tools, and over 75% of organizations are actively trying to consolidate them due to complexity. This is not a signal of maturity. This is a signal of fragmentation. And more importantly, those tools are not operating as a unified system. Research from Palo Alto Network's Unit 42 shows that over half of security tools in most environments are not fully integrated, which means the organization is not operating as a system. It is operating disconnected components, and that fragmentation has direct operational consequences. According to Devo Technology, 67% of SOC teams report that they do not have full visibility across their security stack, not because data does not exist, but because it is not connected in a way that produces the requisite level of clarity. And this is where the problem becomes an executive issue. According to McKinsey & Company, organizations consistently struggle to translate cybersecurity data into actionable business decisions, specifically because systems are fragmented, metrics are inconsistent. So what you end up with is not a tooling gap, but a decision-making gap. And that is the core issue, because tools can generate data, but only architecture can generate the decisions from that data. This is architecture. And notice the order. At the bottom is value, above that structure and above that governance. And only then do you get the protective layer represented by the shield. And this order is not decorative. It is the logic of enterprise cybersecurity when it's done correctly. Value means security starts with what actually matters to the enterprise. Critical business capabilities, critical data, critical identities, critical third-party relationships and services, and critical operational outcomes. In other words, you do not secure everything equally. You secure according to consequence, dependency, and enterprise value. Structure means the enterprise translates that understanding into defined operating pathways. To do that, ownership is clear, intake is clear, identity models are clear, the change pathways are clear, exception handling and logging standards are clear, and escalation logic is clear. Structure is what allows an organization to stop improvising its way through recurring risk. Governance means those structures are enforced, measured, and improved. Governance is where decisions become explicit. It's where trade-offs between speed, risk, cost, and resilience are made consciously rather than accidentally. And it's where the board and executive teams gain confidence that the operating model is not just busy, but actually aligned. And this is why the two sides of the slide are separated by a not equal sign. Tools can support architecture. They cannot replace it. A SIM is not governance. An EDR platform is not structure. A dashboard is not value logic, and a pile of alerts is definitely not a security strategy. A practical example brings this home. Imagine an organization facing repeated identity-driven incidents in a tooling mindset. The response is usually add another control layer, another dashboard, another detector, another workflow. But in an architectural mindset, the organization asks a different set of questions. Which identities matter most? Where is privileged access concentrated? How is conditional access governed? Where are exceptions accumulating? How do joiner, mover, leaver processes connect to actual enterprise risk? And which business services depend on these identities? This is the difference between adding noise and building control. The World Economic Forum's 2025 Global Cybersecurity Outlook reinforces this broader point. It identifies rising cyber complexity as being intensified by the geopolitical tension around the emerging technologies. So the core takeaway from this slide is this. When organizations believe they have a tooling problem, they usually respond by adding products. When they understand they have an operating model problem, they start redesigning how cybersecurity actually works across the enterprise. Because once you understand that tools do not equal architecture, you are finally ready to move beyond noise, beyond fragmentation, and into the real question. What does enterprise look like when a cybersecurity is designed as a system of value, structure, and governance, rather than as an expanding pile of controls? This slide is where the argument becomes operational. And up to this point, we've established that the SOC can become a loop and that more tools do not equal architecture. So this slide takes us the next step and shows the enterprise consequences of that reality. Traditional security programs cannot be governed, measured, or aligned at an enterprise level because they were never architected as enterprise systems in the first place. Look at the left side of the slide. The problem is not the existence of tools, controls, signals, or workflows. Every serious security program has those things. The problem is that they exist in isolation. Those tools are isolated, the controls are inconsistent, the signals are uncorrelated, and the workflows are fragmented. In other words, the organization may have many moving parts, but it does not have a coherent operating system for cybersecurity. The distinction matters enormously. You cannot govern what has no clear systematic design. Governance requires explicit ownership, defined decision rights, consistent operating pathways, and a model for escalation and accountability. NIST CSF 2.0 makes this point directly by adding govern as a core function and stating that the govern function provides outcomes to inform and prioritize other cybersecurity functions in the context of mission and stakeholder expectations. In plain terms, governance is not a side activity. It's the mechanism that makes cyber risk management coherent, at the enterprise level. And this is exactly what traditional programs often lack. When a security program is not architected as a system, ownership fragments. One team owns part of identity, another team owns logging, another handles exceptions, another handles vendor reviews, another handles cloud posture, another handles incident response. But the decision model tying all of that together is weak or non-existent. That is why the right side of the slide begins with governance. No clear ownership or control. This issue is not effort. The issue is that control has not been designed into the system. The second consequence is measurement failure. You cannot measure reliably across a fragmented system because the underlying objects being measured are inconsistent. One team defines risk one way, another team defines severity differently. One workflow captures time to remediate, another does not. One platform has structured metadata, another is mostly free text. One exception process is governed, another lives in email meetings or tribal memory. This is why organizations often end up with dashboards that look polished but do not actually support management. They have metrics but not management grade metrics. They have data, but not normalized decision useful information. And the data reinforces exactly what this slide is showing. This is not just a perception issue, it's a structural reality across the market. According to PwC, only 27% of executives report having clear ownership of cyber risk across their organization. That means the majority of enterprises, accountability is fragmented by design. And if ownership is unclear, governance cannot be enforced. It can only be discussed. Now, layer on measurement. Research from ISACA shows that only 34% of organizations have well-defined cybersecurity metrics that are tied to business objectives. Only 34%, which means that most organizations are not measuring cybersecurity in a way that supports real decision-making. They have data, but not management grade metrics. And then we come to alignment. According to Deloitte, cyber risk in most organizations is still not fully integrated into the enterprise strategy and performance management, which means security operates adjacent to the business, not within it. And when you combine those three conditions, unclear ownership, inconsistent measureship, and weak business alignment, you do not have a management system. You have activity without accountability. And that is exactly what this slide is diagnosing. Now, let's move to the third consequence, alignment failure. Alignment is impossible when the program is not architected around business value. If security work is organized primarily around tools, tickets, isolated controls, or team-specific workflows, then it will struggle to connect cleanly to enterprise outcomes. It will generate activity, but not necessarily strategic relevance. Excuse me. That is why the right side of the slide says alignment, no linkage to business outcomes. Now, a practical use case helps bring this into focus. Imagine an organization rolling out a new customer-facing digital capability. Identity controls are managed by a single team. API security is handled by another. Logging standards vary by the platform. Third-party integration risk is reviewed separately. Vulnerability data comes from multiple tools. Incidents response is owned elsewhere. Exception approvals are scattered. Now, ask 3 executive questions. Who owns the aggregate risk? How is the organization measuring control effectiveness end to end? And how is this initiative security posture linked to the actual business value of the capability being launched? In many traditional programs, there is no clean answer to those 3 questions. And this is precisely what this slide is diagnosing. So at the bottom line on this slide is not subtle, and it should not be. No architecture means no control, and no control means no accountability. And once accountability breaks down, governance becomes performative, measurement becomes unreliable, and alignment becomes aspirational rather than real. That is why traditional security programs struggle so much at the enterprise level. They were built as collections of capabilities, not as systems of management. And that sets up the next step in the narrative perfectly. If traditional programs fail because they're not architected as enterprise systems, then what does it actually mean to architect cybersecurity as an enterprise system in the first place? This is where everything we've discussed comes together. Up to this point, we've diagnosed the problem. We've seen that the SOC, when it becomes the center of gravity, creates a loop. We've seen that threats are accelerating faster than defenses. We've established that more tooling does not solve the problem. And we've shown the traditional programs fail because they are not designed as systems. This slide is the answer. This is what cybersecurity looks like when it is architected correctly at the enterprise level. And the most important thing to understand is this. This is not a collection of capabilities. This is a system. Start at the bottom. The foundation is the enterprise environment, business systems, users, and data. This is where value lives. This is what must be protected. And that is where security must be anchored. Above that are execution systems, tools, platforms, and workflows. And now notice the difference from traditional models. Tools are still here, platforms are still here, workflows are still here, but they're no longer defining the model, they're executing it. That distinction is critical. Above execution sits telemetry and measurement, signals, metrics, observability. This is where most organizations believe they are already mature, but the reality is often different. The issue is not whether telemetry exists. The issue is whether telemetry is structured, normalized, and usable for decision-making. And this is where the data becomes very important. According to Ernst & Young, organizations with integrated cyber risk visibility are significantly more effective in executive decision-making and prioritization. That is the difference between data and measurement. Data tells you what happened, measurement tells you what to do. Now we move up to protection domains, identity, data, cloud, endpoint, etc. And this is how complexity is controlled. Instead of managing thousands of disconnected issues, the enterprise organizes security into governable domains. Each domain can be owned, measured, prioritized, and improved. This is how scale becomes manageable. Now we reach the most important layer, governance and orchestration, policy, ownership, decisioning. This is what turns the entire stack into a system, because without governance, ownership is unclear, decisions are inconsistent, prioritization is reactive. With governance, the system can be directed, trade-offs can be made, accountability becomes real, and this is not theoretical. Boston Consulting Group says organizations operating with integrated cybersecurity operating models outperform peers in resilience and recovery performance. That is the impact of governance combined with architecture. Now, let's step back and look at the full system. Execution feeds telemetry. Telemetry informs domains. Domains are governed. Governance drives decisions, and decisions reshape execution. That's a system, and the system produces outcomes, which is why on the right side of the slide you see governance, clear ownership, policy and control, measurement, consistent metrics and observability, and alignment, direct linkage to business outcomes. And this is where cybersecurity fundamentally changes, because at this point, security is no longer a cost center. It is no longer a reactive function. It's no longer an operational burden. It becomes a management system for risk and value. And the performance difference is measurable. According to Forrester, organizations that adopt integrated security architecture reduce operational complexity and improve efficiency across their security operations. That is what happens when fragmentation is replaced with design. And when you combine that with business alignment, Accenture shows that organization that aligns cybersecurity with business strategy achieves stronger resilience and better business performance outcomes. This is the end state. Not better tools, not faster alerts, better outcomes. And that is why the statement at the bottom of this slide matters. Architecture enables control. Control enables measurement. Measurement enables alignment. Alignment enables value. That's the progression. And that's the difference between organizations that operate securely and organizations that are structured to win with it. Now, security must be managed as a portfolio. This is where architecture becomes execution, because without the portfolio model, even the most well-designed system will fail to scale. On the left side of the slide, you see the traditional approach. Security's reactives, unprioritized, disconnected. Work gets done, but not necessarily the right work. Efforts applied, but not always where it matters most. Resources are consumed, but not always in ways that reduce enterprise risk. This is not a capability problem. This is a prioritization problem. In the SANS Institute's 2023 Security Ops Survey, organizations reported ongoing challenges in coordinating security efforts across teams due to lack of structured planning and prioritization models, which means effort is being applied, but not always aligned to impact. Now look at the right side of the slide. This is the portfolio-based security model. Security is organized into capability domains, identity, data, cloud security, endpoint security, etc. Each domain contains initiatives, controls, tools, but more importantly, each domain is owned. Each domain is prioritized, each domain is funded, and each domain is measured. And each domain is aligned to enterprise strategy. This is the shift from activity to investment discipline. And that shift changes how decisions are made in the organization. In Capgemini's 2022 Cybersecurity Transformation Report, organizations that align cybersecurity programs to business strategy demonstrated stronger effectiveness in directing resources towards their highest risk areas, which means investment begins to follow consequence. Now, consider execution. A portfolio model enforces structure across how work enters, moves, and completes within the system. It reduces duplication, reduces noise, and reduces wasted effort. And it creates visibility into what's actually improving. In KPMG's Cyber Trust Insights report, organizations with coordinated cybersecurity programs reported greater consistency in managing risk across business units. That is what coordination at scale looks like. Now, look at the benefits listed on the slide. Clear ownership, strategic prioritization, resource alignment, measurable outcomes. These are not operational improvements. These are management capabilities. And management capabilities are what enable scale, because without ownership, nothing is accountable. Without prioritization, everything competes equally. Without alignment, effort fragments. Without measurement, nothing improves. A portfolio model addresses all of those points, and that is why the bottom of this slide matters. Aligned, owned, measured, optimized. This is not just a description. This is the operating condition required for enterprise security to function at scale. And this is the bridge to the next stage, because once security structures as a portfolio, it can finally evolve into a controlled, measurable way. And that is what enables the maturity progression we move into next. This slide shows the evolution of enterprise security. It is not a shift in tools. It's a shift in operating models, and more importantly, it's a shift in capability. Organizations don't move from reactive to adaptive overnight. They progress through stages, and each stage represents a fundamentally different way of operating. We begin with reactive security, and this incident-driven response. The organization's reacting to events after they occur. Work's driven by alerts, escalations, urgent issues. There is effort, but not enough structure to scale. The next stage is tool-centric security. This is where organizations invest in platforms and expand visibility. Capabilities increase, but coherence does not necessarily follow. Organizations see more, but does not always understand more. And this is where many organizations end up plateauing. The next stage is structured security, and this is the inflection point in the model. Processes become standardized, workflows become repeatable, ownership becomes clearer, and the organization begins to move from activity to execution. In ServiceNow's State of the Security Ops report, organizations that implemented standardized and automated security processes demonstrated measurable improvements in operational efficiency and incident handling performance. This is where scale becomes possible. Now we move to governed security. At this stage, security is aligned to enterprise strategy, work is prioritized intentionally, decisions are structured, metrics begin to support real management. Gartner's cybersecurity program maturity model research highlights that organizations operating at higher maturity levels are significantly more effective aligning security execution to business priorities and outcomes. This is where security becomes visible at the executive level. And finally, we reach adaptive security. This is where the system evolves beyond static control. It becomes dynamic, predictive. It becomes continuously improving. MIT Sloan Management Review's research on AI-driven organizations shows that enterprises integrating AI into operational decision systems achieve faster decision cycles and greater adaptability in dynamic environments. This is what enables real-time response and optimization. Now step back and look at the full progression, right? Each stage builds on the one before it, and each stage increases both operational capability and business alignment. The CMMI Institute's Capability Model Integration Framework demonstrates that organizations that are operating at a higher maturity level consistently achieve more predictable performance, stronger process discipline, and improved outcome reliability. This is what the slide is showing. Not just improvement, but compounding capability. And that's where the transformation inflection point matters, because once an organization moves into structured security, everything changes. From that point, forward capability compounds instead of resetting. And that is the difference between organizations that manage security and organizations that mature it. This slide explains where most organizations get stuck. Not at the beginning, because they're unaware, but in the middle, at what we call the tool-centric plateau. On the left side of this slide, you'll see what it looks like. More alerts, more tools, more activity like we talked about. And at first, this can feel like progress. But if you look at the center of the slide, you see what's really happening behind the scenes. The system is still operating in that same loop we discussed: alerts, triage, response, repeat. And above that, the reality becomes clear. Capability stalls because activity is scaling, but the operating model is not evolving. Splunk's State of Security report documents that over 50% of security teams report that they cannot keep up with alert volume, which means increased visibility is not translating into increased control. This is not just inefficiency, this is structural waste embedded in the system. The RSA Conference Security Maturity Research findings highlight that expanding security tooling alone does not proportionally improve overall security effectiveness, which means organizations are scaling inputs without scaling outcomes. That's the plateau. Now look at the right side of the slide. You can just see the next state: governance, structure, system level control. But the organization can't quite get there because it's trapped in operational gravity, because everything's pulling it back into that loop. CIS's Cybersecurity Maturity Report indicates that many organizations stall at the intermediate maturity levels due to lack of integration and governance across systems. This is exactly what this slide is showing. The organization is not failing, it's plateauing. And the plateau is dangerous because from the outside, it may look like progress. The dashboards are active, the tools are running, the team's busy, but underneath, capability is not compounding. And that is why the bottom of the slide matters. Activity scales, capability plateaus, and that is the trap. And the only way out of that trap is not more effort, it's a different model, a model that evolves beyond tools into structure, beyond activity into architecture. Because until the system changes, the outcome does not. And this is exactly what we address in the next step of the transformation. This slide explains why security transformation fails. Not because organizations are unaware, not because they lack tools, not because they lack effort, but because the system was never designed correctly. Look at the left side of the slide. Tools are isolated, controls are inconsistent, signals uncorrelated, workflows fragmented. This is not a transformation problem. This is a system design problem. And when transformation is applied on top of fragmentation, it doesn't fix the system, it amplifies the complexity. Now, look at the center of the slide. Not architected as a system. That is the root cause, because transformation cannot succeed without structure. And the data supports this directly. McKinsey's data transformation research shows that nearly 70% of transformation initiatives fail due to lack of alignment and execution discipline. That's not a technology failure, it's an operating model failure. Now look at how that failure manifests. The organization continues to operate in that same loop we discussed: alerts, triage, response, and activity continues, but the system does not evolve. Harvard Business Review research on strategy execution highlights that organizations consistently struggle to translate strategy into execution when their operating models are fragmented. That is exactly what the slide is showing. Transformation is declared, but execution remains unchanged. Now consider structure. MIT Center for Information Systems Research, in its work on enterprise architecture, shows that siloed systems prevent organizations from achieving coordinated enterprise outcomes, which means without integration, transformation cannot scale. Now move to the right of the slide. You can see what the organization is trying to achieve: governance, structure, measurement, alignment, but each one's blocked because the system underneath does not support it. And this is where transformation breaks down completely. That is the defining insight of this slide. You cannot transform a system that has not been architected. You cannot govern what is not structured. You cannot measure what is not consistent, and you cannot align what is not connected. And that is why the statement at the bottom matters. No architecture, no control, no accountability. It's not a slogan. It's the reality of failed transformation. Because without architecture, every improvement remains local. Without control, every decision remains inconsistent. And without accountability, every outcome remains unclear. And that's why security transformation so often stalls. Not because the organizations aren't trying, but because they are trying to transform activity instead of redesigning the system itself. This slide represents the shift from security operations to security as a system. It's the transition from activity to architecture. On the left of the slide, you see the security as a function. Again, reactive, tool-driven, siloed, activity-focused. This is how many organizations still operate today. Security exists, but it exists alongside the business. It responds to issues, it processes work, it manages tools, but it does not shape the system itself. That's the limitation, because functions can operate, but systems can scale. Now look at the center of the slide, engineered as a system. That's the transition point. Security stops being something the organization does and becomes something that the organization is structured around. This is where performance begins to change. And that's the difference between isolated activity and system level performance. Now look at the right side of the slide. This is the integrated security system. Governance and orchestration, policy, ownership, and decisioning, protection domains, execution systems, tools, platforms, and workflows, enterprise environment. This is not a collection of tools. This is a designed operating model. And this is where transformation becomes real. This is exactly what the slide represents: the shift from incremental improvement to structural redesign and continual ongoing improvement. Now, consider the integration across domains. Deloitte's Insights Digital Transformation Survey highlights that organizations integrating systems across business and technology domains achieve stronger resilience and operational performance, which reinforces a core principle here. Security must operate across identity, data, cloud, and endpoint, all of the different pillars, not as a unified system, not as isolated functions. Now look at how decisions are made. This is what governance and orchestration represent. Decision-making at the system level, not at the tool level, not at the team level, at the enterprise level. Now step back and look at the full transformation. On the left, security is something the organization does. On the right, the security is integral to the organization, and that's the difference. And that's why the statement at the bottom matters. Architecture enables control, control enables outcomes. Because when the system is designed correctly, everything else follows, and that's the transition from security operations to security as a system. And this slide represents the future state, adaptive security, the intelligent enterprise. This is what becomes possible once security is aligned and engineered as a system. On the left side, you see the engineered security system we established in the previous slide. Structured, governed, aligned, measurable. That system creates stability. But stability alone is not enough because the environment continues to evolve. Threats evolve, technology evolves, business models evolve. So the next step is not just control, it's adaptation. Now look at the center of the slide, the adaptive intelligence layer. This is where the system begins to learn. It's where signals become intelligence and intelligence become action. This is where performance begins to change fundamentally. That is the shift from reactive analysis to real-time decisioning. Now we move to the right side of the slide. This is the adaptive security system. Predictive intelligence, real-time decisioning, autonomous response, continuous optimization, cross-domain correlation. Each of these capabilities builds on the system we created, and each requires integration across the enterprise. That's what continuous optimization looks like. The system does not remain static. It evolves with every signal and every outcome. Now, consider correlation across domains. Cisco's security outcome studies showed that organizations with integrated security architectures achieve stronger resilience and better security outcomes, which reinforces a critical principle. Security must operate across all the silos, identity, data, cloud, endpoints simultaneously, not sequentially. Now, consider automation. NVIDIA's research on AI-driven cybersecurity systems highlights how accelerated computing and AI are enabling autonomous detection and response capabilities at scale. That is what makes real-time response possible. Now step back and look at the entire progression. On the left, we built a system. In the center, we enabled intelligence. On the right, the system becomes adaptive, and that's the transformation. And that's where cybersecurity becomes a strategic advantage, because at this stage, the organization is no longer reacting, it's anticipating, no longer responding, it's optimizing. It's no longer defending in isolation, it's learning across the system. And that is why the statement at the bottom matters. Intelligence transforms systems into advantage, because once intelligence is embedded into the system, capability compounds continuously, and that is the future of enterprise security. What leaders must do now is move from awareness to execution. At this point in the presentation, the case has already been made. The old model is too reactive. The tool-centric plateau is real. Fragmented programs fail to scale, and the future belongs to organizations that redesign security as a system. So this slide isn't about theory, it's about leadership action. The first leadership imperative appears on the left side of the slide. Redefine security as a system. That means moving beyond tool-centric thinking. That means establishing integrated architecture. It means designing for scale. And that means treating execution systems as part of the larger operating model. That is the leadership gap this slide is addressing. Confidence without systemic readiness is not resilience. The second imperative appears in the center of the slide. Implement portfolio-driven governance. Security work must be aligned to business priorities. It must be sequenced intentionally. It must be measured consistently. And it must be executed through structured governance. That matters because security transformation and digital transformation now operate as one executive agenda. If governance does not improve, security investment will continue to fragment, and fragmented investment does not produce enterprise control. The third imperative appears on the right of the slide. Invest in adaptive intelligence, enable real-time decisioning, build continuous learning systems, prepare for autonomous security, and optimize continuously. That is why adaptive intelligence is no longer optional. Static control models will not keep pace with dynamic threat behavior. Now, step back and take it all in. The left side establishes the foundation. The center creates governance discipline. The right creates future readiness. This is the progression leaders must drive. Redesign the system, govern the portfolio, invest in intelligence, and that is why the statement at the bottom of the slide is so impactful. Security transformation is a leadership imperative, not a tooling imperative, not a reporting exercise, not a side initiative, a leadership imperative, because only leadership can align architecture, governance, investment, and intelligence into one coherent enterprise model. And that is what execution looks like now. I'll close the formal portion of the presentation with one core idea. The future of security will not be defined by organizations that respond faster. It will be defined by organizations that design better systems. Everything we've discussed today leads to that conclusion. Security is no longer a function, no longer a collection of tools. It's no longer an operational activity. It is an enterprise system, and systems determine outcomes. The organizations that recognize that shift early will move differently. They'll design differently, govern differently, invest differently, and they will outperform organizations that don't. This is no longer a technical conversation. It's a leadership conversation. It's a design conversation. It's a transformation conversation. And as we move to the discussion, I would encourage you to shift the lens from tools to systems, from activity to architecture, from efforts to outcomes, from local optimization to enterprise coherence, because that is real leverage now exists. Some organizations will continue to operate security as activity. Others will design security as a system, and the future will belong to the ones who design it. Thank you. Right on target for this webinar. Part of the reason I went with the EC Council for my certified ethical hacker certification and my certified CISO was because of the comprehensive way the EC Council approaches the industry. Much like the model we discussed today, they architect their credentials in meaningful ways to be dynamic and to be in front of the trends in cybersecurity and in different industries. So I would suggest, based on your industry, your things that you're interested in, things that you have a passion for, look for those and align those areas with your professional certifications to help get you to where you need to be to start delivering value in a security context. And again, it really comes down to what works for you. Like, I started with the certified ethical hacker because I had a pretty strong foundation, and because certified ethical hacking gave me a wide base in which I could specialize from. So with each person, it's a little bit different. Look at where you are, look at what the work that interests you and that you're engaged in, and then look at what the EC Council offers and align with the training that matters most and will produce the most value. Again, start small and build up from there. But at this point in today's industry, any choice you make to start learning is a good one and will add value to your practice. And this is really the crux of it, right? Much like my work with enterprise delivery, oftentimes security is billed as a cost center, not a value center. And again, I think that's part of a legacy sort of view of what security was and still is in some regards. But where we're heading requires a thoughtful conversation, like the title of the webinar talks about, moving beyond the SOC, right? Start thinking about the security as a system, start aligning the overarching enterprise security strategy accordingly, and make sure that you're communicating effectively with leadership, because like much of the work I'm doing now for my primary client, we have an excellent CISO with a strong vision, and that vision empowers us to move forward and architect a system that will deliver the enterprise security strategy in an optimal way and allow us to communicate it in real, meaningful terms to the board of directors. And I'm going to take it back to some of the work I'm doing with my primary client now. In my experience, based on industry, based on organization, the metrics can change and things like that, but ultimately, and certainly at the beginning, when you're really trying to get your arms around a value architecture system and how to architect it, implement it, and operate it, it really comes down to understanding your environment in meaningful ways and having a strongly rooted foundation in enterprise risk management. For example, we use X Analytics with one of my clients to help quantify enterprise risk. So it's not necessarily a single metric that has the most impact. It is the narrative that we create through the quantification of security's operations that tells a story, because in a more reactive, alert-based sort of security system, that may suffice. But when you're architecting a value system, it comes down to more than just isolated metrics or a couple of metrics. It comes down to creating the narrative arc that conveys the value that your security teams are adding in meaningful ways. And as you know, security often doesn't track like regular work. It's not like you could just put canned metrics on security and on security operations and really get a true view of what's happening. Investigations don't run like a project. Sometimes investigations go off in other directions on tangents. So it really comes down to creating a meaningful narrative through your quantitative data that explains and conveys the value your security program is adding to the organization you work with. I want to thank everyone for coming today and thank the EC Council for inviting me to speak as part of their Cyber Talks. Definitely looking forward. We've got 3 more webinars coming up over the course of the next 3 months. We'll be sending out information beyond that. And I am very excited about the EC Council's CIPM certification especially. This touches enterprise delivery and provides something vital. So if you haven't checked that out, if you're into enterprise delivery, definitely check that out, because that's where things are heading, and that's part of the way we add value to security through a portfolio delivery system. So thank you all very much for your time today. I look forward to seeing you all again soon.